Hi, and welcome to the WSBA Crypto Roundup for February 16th, 2024. I'm here with Casper from Technos, our special guest, and of course, my amazing co host, David Brill. Ron Quaranta is in the background, but he sends his regrets that he can't be on today, but he'll be back next time. And so we're very excited. There's so much to talk about this week. Before we begin, just a few disclaimers. One, nothing we say is legal, investment, accounting, tax, or really any other kind of advice. What we're about to say, they're our own views. They may not reflect the views of our employers or really of any other person, but we hope you'll enjoy our thoughts. So I'm thrilled to see you guys. I hope you had a great week. How are you doing?
Doing just fine.
I'm doing great, Josh. I'm here out in Arizona for this week for the long holiday weekend and ready to enjoy some of the sun and some of the hot action we've been seeing in crypto too.
Absolutely. And what about you, Casper? How's your week been?
Week has been good. We're getting prepped to go to NFT Paris next week. So, just trying to get as much off our plates prior to boarding the plane and being somewhat offline. So, it's always a little bit hectic, but it'll be fun.
That's great. So, David, you mentioned, I think, what's been on everyone's mind. What is the market doing, and what's happening here? Again, not investment advice, anyone, but David's pulling out his crystal ball, which has been pretty good, actually.
Yeah, I'd say it's been pretty good. Look, we are just seeing a lot of demand from the ETFs for buying Bitcoin. And so you're seeing real price acceleration from that. And, there have been different charts about, how much Bitcoin's being purchased. But I think I saw one today that, it was either 5 or 10,000 Bitcoin a day being acquired through the ETFs and the miner production being like 1/10 of that or 1/4 of that. So you're really seeing some upward buying pressure. We're starting to get in areas where there is a lot of resistance, a lot of selling, and a lot of technical selling. So it's going to be really interesting to see, if we can push through this 52,000 level or up to the 55,000 level. So, but we've seen a lot of appreciation now for people who are naysayers about the ETF. We're actually higher and the price of the ETF and of underlying Bitcoin, than we were when the ETFs first were approved about a month ago, a little over a month ago. So really good acceleration, good follow through, and continued high volume. So it's been a very positive open for the Bitcoin ETFs.
Yeah. What do you think, Casper?
Well, David brought up an interesting point is that we're seeing some selling pressure, and over the last few weeks or so, we knew that some of the bankruptcies were selling. We have Genesis probably doing that right now. But if you look at the stats, the vast majority of people that are selling are the very small wallets, so like less than 1 Bitcoin, and that just it kind of surprises me because I would think that a lot of the retail folks, perhaps the retail folks that are in right now, um, they're probably really excited about Bitcoin in general. So why would you sell if there's so much like positive narrative out there? But maybe it's just because people like they see the gains that they saw over the last few weeks even, and they're just like, all right, well, let's just cash in some of that and let all the big boys pick up whatever I have to sell. It's good what David brought up, the 10 to 12x buying versus supply. That's obviously a very bullish thing, but when I look at that, I'm like, okay, so why isn't the price moving faster than it is? If that's truly the case, and it's also kind of novel, right? Like I honestly don't necessarily know specifically how much buying and selling was going on in Bitcoin like prior to the ETFs in terms of volumes, but there's just a lot of different dynamics that are new, and there's a lot of people that are charting, oh, see, like Bitcoin is mimicking exactly what it did in 2020 or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, but the facts and circumstances are so different right now that it's like, I mean, that's cool from a chart perspective, but what does it really mean? And I think that we also need to understand that the 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 whole community, the crypto community, is kind of like bipolar. So like when things are great, it's like amazing, and then when things are bad, like everyone is like ready to jump off a building. You know what I mean? And it's like, um, I try to be skeptical. I try to read every article, thinking like, okay, well, what does this really mean? And I think a good example of that is there was a chart circulating where they were showing the gold ETFs being sold off a lot, and then the Bitcoin ETFs being bought a lot. And everyone's like, oh, see, everyone is moving from gold to Bitcoin. But it's like, well, do we really know that? Like, do we actually know where that money is going? It could be any other asset. Um, and if the narrative is like, oh, retail is not going to come in until all-time highs, because then on the news there's like Bitcoin hits all-time highs and people are going to FOMO in. That same narrative holds for the stock market, right? It's like the stock market is on all-time highs too, so maybe all the gold is moving into stocks. I can't tell.
Yeah,
It's a
it's
good
hard to
question, but
tell.
I mean,
Sorry.
sorry, David.
Well, go ahead, Josh. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm glad that you brought up the gold ETFs, because it's so interesting to me. Many people refer to Bitcoin as digital gold, and then the focus on GLD and what's happening with that. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell what exactly is happening, but I think I read that that Bitcoin ETFs have already done what it took 2 years for gold ETFs to achieve.
Yep.
And that's pretty astounding. But David, I didn't mean to speak over you.
No, I was just going to add a little levity, and Casper's too modest to mention that he took 100 gold bars from his house and traded those in to buy some Bitcoin ETF. I think he lost a whole day trying to bring those to the bank. So no, but all kidding aside, look, I think diversification is important. And look, I shared an anecdote with some of our members in our working group session that, I'm newly at FTI and I'm very happy to be part of the organization. And, when I was looking at maybe buying some of the Bitcoin ETFs, in the self-directed part of my account, the provider has not yet made those available. So just an example of like a regular individual who was, unable to buy, these Bitcoin ETFs through their provider. So I think even with the amount of demand that we're seeing, there's still a lot of people through some of the channels, whether it be Vanguard, whether it be Merrill or others, that can't buy Bitcoin through their advisors or through those accounts. Now, obviously, they can go online through another provider and buy it. But so I think the demand that we're seeing isn't totally captured right now. Then I think Casper made a point in the session that we had that even the providers that are allowing for it, they need training, and that training takes time. And it's not like they have an all hands meeting. Okay, the Bitcoin ETF's live. Every advisor has to show up at 1:00 on Monday and get trained on it. So it's a very interesting dynamic, and so that's also playing out.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's been popping up as people have been saying, hey, is there any kind of off-the-shelf compliance package for Bitcoin ETFs? And so that's, an interesting question about, developing trainings, have like what all the pieces that now folks need to think about. I'm really curious about one thing, well, lots of things, but, in a prior call, podcast, Roundup, David and Ron spent a bit of time talking about interest rates and what impact they could have on the markets. And so I think we saw further speculation, but potential evidence that maybe rate cuts are not coming for a while, as we discussed before, because I think we recently saw that inflation came out to be higher than expected. So people are now even saying that it may be less likely that rate cuts are coming in the near future. So what does this mean, if anything? Crystal ball's out.
Well,
or magic
Go ahead,
8 ball.
Casper.
Whatever.
well, I mean, I think that there's Bitcoin is kind of unique in that sense. So obviously lower interest rate environment is better for risk assets in general. So if the lower risk or lower interest rate environment is being put off by, like rate cuts being kicked down the road, that's theoretically not great. But there's so many other factors right now that are in play that I'm not sure that is such a huge driver right now of the markets. Um, the other thing is also, I just recently I saw that on the non-Bitcoin side of crypto, all the alts and all the different projects that are starting up right now, fundraising is up. The VCs are starting to let go of their money again, and projects are coming out of the woodwork that were unsure whether or not they wanted to launch a token, or um, they just felt like the market environment wasn't right for it, and that's starting to thaw a little bit. So, I think that even in the actual price movement, you saw, I think that it went from like 52 and it dipped like to like 50 and a half on sort of like the publication of the CPI, and then by the end of the night it was back up. So the market just kind of like struck it off, and I think I would tend to agree. Now, long term, obviously, it would be great if rates come down for the industry.
What about you,
Yeah.
David?
No, I mean, look, I think that the market is kind of priced in a certain amount of cuts. When the traditional market's priced in a certain amount of cuts for 2024, and if inflation stays high and unemployment stays low, and consumer prices keep going up, that's going to be hard to deliver on those rates. So I think you really do have some macro issues. I think in the crypto space, those are balanced by these ETFs and the ability and accessibility of more people to have access to buying crypto in a security wrapper. And so we can't underestimate that people have seen how well, Bitcoin has done and want to have, exposure to it. And so what I would say in a more normalized time, I think this would be downward pressure. But in light of the fact that there's this whole new distribution channel exists, that's more than counterbalancing the potential downward pressure from higher interest rates. I mean, the bottom line, Josh, is the cheaper money is to borrow, the more it will be used in a speculative manner. The more expensive it is to borrow, the better you have to do to cover your costs of borrowing.
That's a great point. Yeah. Well, I wanted to also, like, it's great to talk about the price, right? And people love saying like, oh, we're gonna see, $170,000 by the end of the year, et cetera. And it's all, I would love to believe that, but I think that we should keep a broader view and look at big picture. Like, what does this ETF mean, and all the success of the ETF for the industry as a whole? And I'm trying to look at cultural changes, right? So we're all of a sudden, yesterday there was this article that banks are now trying to get the SEC to say like, oh, ETFs are different, so you can be custodians. So they're trying to sort of get a piece of that action, whereas not even 2 weeks ago, Jamie Dimon said like, oh, it's all for drug dealers and traffickers and that kind of stuff. So it's interesting how that is changing. And then the biggest wild card of the week in my perception is the Warren flag. Did you guys see that?
Yes.
The flag signed by Elizabeth Warren, like in honor of Satoshi Nakamoto. It's kind of like, where did that come from? Did you not see that?
No.
Yes.
Oh my God, yeah. At first, when I saw it, I mean, I don't know the specifics around it, but apparently it's an American flag that is flown over the Capitol in honor of Satoshi Nakamoto, and Elizabeth Warren signed it. And that at first I was like, this is 100% a meme. Like, there's no way this is real. And then it started like popping up everywhere, and it was real. And I don't know, like, what does that even mean? Like, she's the biggest warrior.
I think that's just a, do things for your constituent kind of thing. And it's sort of a pro forma kind of thing. Like, I'm not reading too much into that, Casper, because I think her views on the space are very well known and contrary to that. But it is amusing. I definitely saw it on Twitter, and I had a good
Yeah.
laugh. Maybe I thought I was up too late from the jet lag, and
Right.
it was like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not reading this right. I must be misreading this, and must be
But
time
the
to.
note that came with it said something to the order of, for, Satoshi Nakamoto for its, grand achievement of providing like this platform of wealth transfer for the person on the street, right? So like any
Yeah.
person as a, and I know that she typically fights the banks and stuff, so maybe that fits her narrative, but I don't know. That was a shocker to me. So, it's I understand that, like, on the actual hill, there's probably not a big shift in her perception of the industry. But when stuff like that comes out and it gets into the news, and okay, so now the SEC said, yes, you can do an ETF. All the big institutions are getting in. The banks want a piece of it now in some way or another. Um, I don't know. Like, I just feel like there's a paradigm slowly shifting.
I mean,
Yeah.
everyone wants to be on the winning side, right? Ultimately, but it's
Yeah.
so funny. I didn't see that, and so when you said Warren flag, I thought you were saying Warren flag. I was thinking like when they have companies have like riffs,
No.
like and I
Yeah.
was like a Warren.
That could have been a Dutch accent too. Like, I don't know, but
No, I would never have put together Elizabeth Warren and signing a
yeah.
Bitcoin flag.
Yeah.
But David,
No.
I interrupted you. Sorry again.
What did you say?
I said I interrupted you. Apologies again.
No, I was just thinking it is fairly amusing, but no, look, I think we have a real. I think the banks are having FOMO, like corporate FOMO, we'll call it, and they're seeing that some of the sponsors are doing really well, and I think they're seeing. I think what in my mind banks may have underestimated is that there is a real demand to buy Bitcoin in these wrappers and these ETF wrappers, and I think some of the banks just didn't appreciate that. So now when they see BlackRock and Fidelity, have multiple billions of dollars of under assets, in a short period of time, I think like any prudent individual, they're like, whoa, like why aren't we involved in this? I'm sure somebody in the business development side or corporate development at these banks like, well, why aren't we involved in this? And well, why aren't we custodying this? Or why aren't we holding this on our balance sheet? And so, I think you're now seeing those questions. I don't think that they're necessarily become believers, so to speak, but they are believers and value and on their balance sheet and more revenue. And so I think they've turned around on that point, like Casper said.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for banks, I know they're looking into many different things. And so some of them might be very interested in stuff. But when you do the analysis of some of these proposed rule changes, or certainly SAB 121, with a lot of different things, it's the answers that you can give. You may want to give persuasive advice as to why something should be okay, but it can be a challenge, as you guys know. So one other thing, well, there's lots of other things, but another thing that I saw just in the past day is that a certain trading platform seems to have performed very well in its earnings, and that there were some changes in ratings. And I think I wonder whether this is, this thawing, right, from last year and certainly the end of 2022, whether this, as we see analysts begin to improve ratings, not across the board, but meaningfully, whether
Yeah.
this is going to have downstream effects or other effects for the industry. What do you guys think?
Well, one of the big things was, Josh, that, and I'll say it's Coinbase. I think analysts weren't sure that if the people were buying a lot of the Bitcoin ETF and not doing the trading on Coinbase's platform, would they be able to make up for it enough by being custodian for some of the ETFs? And they were able to prove by making positive EBITDA or earning money this quarter that they're able to do that, and they're diversifying their offerings. And it's interesting because just because there's a Bitcoin ETF, there's still a lot of other tokens that people are interested in that they can use different crypto platforms to buy. So it's not a total zero-sum game. But look, when you have, the major cryptocurrency exchange, have a good earnings quarter, that just bodes well for, the industry as a whole, because the other ones are private, so you don't know how they're doing financially.
Right.
Now, Coinbase is probably, gained some market share in the US because of the situation with Binance. So they're probably seeing some uplift from that too.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because in my mind, Coinbase is a relatively good temperature check on what's going on, like overall, especially right now. Because if you look at their earnings, so how they did well is they made a lot of money off of institutional and
Yeah.
not even that much money off of retail. So it fits the narrative that retail hasn't really come in yet that much, but somehow they are making a lot of money on institutional. So well played to them. Like they're doing well with that. And then they were able, I don't necessarily know how they did it, but they were able to essentially increase their profitability a lot. So less expenses or higher margin products. I'm not entirely sure what they did, but that's good too. But yeah, again, it's what's driving the markets right now seems to be institutional from all sides.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
MicroStrategy's had a very good run also. Their share price has gone up a lot. And, Michael Saylor, they're big fans of his, they're big detractors of his, but right now his strategy is working well and paying off for shareholders.
Well, he's using leverage to like buy
Yeah.
more of the best performing asset there is. So yeah, he's doing well.
I mean, basically all he needs to do is create another company that does the same thing for NVIDIA, and then he'll be really hitting home runs.
Exactly.
But look, you have to give him, kudos that he had a strategy that was, not simple and straightforward, in the sense that not everybody agreed with it. Some people thought it was very risky, and he's ridden
Yep.
it out, and to his benefit, the company succeeded.
And Josh, David, like as you know, I'm not an attorney, I'm a digital asset valuation expert, but from an ETH ETF perspective, that's sort of on the docket. People are speculating on that. I think that somewhat of the overall consensus is that it's not going to get approved without a lawsuit. So what does that timeline look like? So I think May is the deadline for either approve or deny. Assuming it will get denied and they'll be sued. Like how fast can that lawsuit be resolved? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
What do you think, Josh?
I mean, I'm not sure how soon a lawsuit that hasn't been filed can be resolved, right? So I think, but I do think, not exactly answering your question, I do think if people look at how much, I would be interested in knowing how much Grayscale spent in its fight against the SEC, right? Relative to the amount of money that the Bitcoin ETFs have brought in. And that would be an interesting thing in terms of predicting the likelihood that someone takes on the SEC if it isn't approved.
Well,
Because go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
No.
I'm
I was
just
done.
jumping in today way too much, and that's without caffeine, no less. Well, what I was going to say is that the sponsors for the Bitcoin ETF, are making quite a bit of money, even on these lower spreads that they're charging, the fees. And Grayscale is still charging their full 150 bips. So there's plenty of profit to be, rolled over into a new opportunity to, file a lawsuit if necessary. But I'm very interested to see, I'm curious to know both of your thoughts, because, if you think about it, there's an opportunity to say that, look, the Bitcoin ETF, there hasn't been price manipulation. It has run smoothly. And we already have an ETH futures ETF. So there's a lot of pieces that are already in place. So why? No, Ether is very different than Bitcoin, and there's staking and there's some other elements to it. But I think on the fundamentals of the fund of an ETF, that there really aren't issues, because that market manipulation piece has sort of been proven away. So I think it really may come down to, Ethereum and how it operates differently from Bitcoin as the one thing that the commission might look to sort of push off any approvals.
Agreed. I mean, I do think though, like you said, the fact that there are futures, right? That there are futures ETFs for ETH. I mean, it's getting back to a similar story of what we saw before. And yeah, I mean, again, I think if people look at the ROI for bringing a lawsuit and what it may mean on a go forward basis in the Bitcoin context, maybe people will be motivated to do the same. I do think it's interesting going back to the analysts for a second and some of the earnings announcements.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least in the case of the trading platform that you mentioned, right? The fact that the SEC has this ongoing enforcement action, it seems like the sentiment has, I don't want to say turned, because I feel like a lot of people always were out there, right, in support of the trading platform. I'll just say, okay, Coinbase, right?
It's public, Josh. You can say it. There's no harm.
It's fair. But it's just interesting to me. I do wonder what the SEC thinks, that about not only, the use of Coinbase as the custodian for so many, but also just that, it seems that market support is growing.
My view, Josh, is that the longer all of this works as it should, there's not manipulation, there's the ability to cash out and, movement like you would expect from other ETFs. The more that goes on, the less some of these ancillary issues become meaningful. And ultimately, everybody agrees Bitcoin is not a security, it's a commodity. And whatever the result is of the lawsuit between Coinbase and the government, that's not going to affect, how the treatment of Bitcoin, how Bitcoin is treated. It may affect the market structure of how Coinbase's exchange looks like, but it doesn't fundamentally affect the treatment of Bitcoin or how it will be traded. So I think, for the most part, especially if you're buying it in an ETF, because you're not going to be buying it through Coinbase's exchange, for the most part, I don't see that lawsuit affecting their piece of this ETF ecosystem.
That makes sense. And what do you guys think? I don't know if you've been following, but certainly speaking of Bitcoin, right? The Craig Wright trial, which is ongoing. Some of the latest headlines that I saw on CoinDesk today involved, I guess, a witness saying that she knew right away that Satoshi Nakamoto allegedly was Craig Wright because when Craig Wright was 18 or 19, she saw him dressed as a ninja.
Very convincing evidence. By that logic, my 5-year-old daughter can be Satoshi Nakamoto too.
Yeah.
I mean, so what is the significance, if any, for the industry of this trial, in your view, guys? Or is it just insignificant in the whole scheme of things?
Go ahead, David.
No, I want to hear what you have to say, Casper. I'm curious. I see you leaning in here, so.
No, I mean, I don't know. Like I think in some ways it's really, really, really good that Satoshi Nakamoto is this like vague, unknown figure, and nobody knows who he is, what he is, if he's alive, if it's a he, if it's a she, if it's a group of people. I think the ambiguity around that is actually really, really good for Bitcoin and the decentralized and non-controlled narrative of it. So honestly, like I would love for nobody to pursue that suit or anyone else trying to figure out who he is. Like, let's just leave it where it is. And if the tech works, the tech works, because let's say they do say like, okay, it's this guy or it's that lady or whatever. Now we're going to judge Bitcoin as a network on the capabilities or on sort of like the person that was behind it. Whereas let's just judge it based on the technology, in my view. But
yeah. Well, what do you think, Josh?
I mean, I tend to share Casper's view. I mean, I think, whatever one, I don't personally know Craig Wright, but certainly there are lots of different views about him, right? And I do think that one of the positives, as Casper was saying, about not knowing who Satoshi Nakamoto is you don't have the kind of personal, I don't want to say baggage, but maybe luggage that comes with a strong personality, to say the least. And so I think, yeah, I think I agree. I think it's in the best interest of the industry just to have this mysterious shadowy figure who gave us this technology, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think, David?
I think, yeah, it's just, my belief is that he's not Satoshi Nakamoto, and that for whatever reason, he's decided to insert himself into the narrative. And I don't know why he's decided that. Is it, to try and get wealthy off of patents and other intellectual property matters? It just seems like he's superfluous to the whole ecosystem right now. And this lawsuit is just sort of it right now, until I see something more substantial. It's just a lot of noise to me. Like, I think the Coinbase litigation and the Ripple litigation, those are like things that really capture my attention more than the sort of antics of what's going on in his litigation. Speaking of what's going on in litigations, and broadly speaking, Josh, we have a holiday week coming up. What's going to be your focus?
I'm just focused on work, honestly. Just doing a bunch of analyses for different projects. But I mean, like many of us, I read a lot of the news, although I've been staying away, as you probably could tell, from Twitter for a little while, and even LinkedIn for longer than I normally do, which is probably why I hadn't heard of the Warren flags. But I will be tuning back in. I had to kind of sequester myself away from that for a little while. But I understand that not this week, but next week is, for example, like the Penn Blockchain Conference is coming up. So I think there's a number of conferences. Casper, you mentioned Paris,
Yeah,
right?
doing NFT Paris, and then right after is ETH Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of excitement
Yeah,
around a lot of.
I wanted to go to ETH Denver. The schedule's just been so packed. But I'm actually going to be in Arizona next week, which I'm really happy about. But I'm going to be following the markets closely. Like, I'm very curious to see if we have a follow through here to 55,000, or, Genesis got approval to sell its holdings in GBTC, which are valued around $1.5 billion. So I'm also curious to see if that has an impact on the market with their selling and how they go about the selling. Is it a more measured selling where just kind of going, taking out some of the liquidity, the new liquidity, or is it sort of more blunt block trades that brings the market down? So I think that's going to be something really interesting. Also, I think it's really another thing to keep an eye on is Ethereum. The hype around, the potential ETF, I think, is going to start to grow. And I think you may see the same play where people start buying Ethereum into the potential ETF filing and approval to, see some gains in that before, it gets approval as an ETF. So that's one narrative that we may also see. So I think there's really some interesting things going on. And also, I'll be curious to see where we close in February. And we could probably talk about that, before the end of February. But the February close will be interesting because the halving is, now less than 60 days away, or approximately 60 days away.
And what's going to happen in advance of the halving?
Well, in the past, we've seen the markets run up into the halving. But what do you think, Casper? Like, do you think we have one more sell-off coming before the halving, or what's your crystal ball telling you?
Well, my crystal ball is very wrong when we talked about launch of the Bitcoin ETF date. So I try to stay away from predictions, but and I try to be skeptic, but I find it really hard to find facts or certain patterns that would force a lot of selling. So by definition, if and that's a big if these big inflows from the institutions, from the BlackRocks, Fidelities, etc., if that continues on a daily basis, then I think that the Genesis bankruptcy selling is probably going to be absorbed relatively easily over, the next month or so.
Mhm.
So like that would beg me to think that Bitcoin is going to stay flat for a little bit, and then I do think that a month prior to 30 days prior to the halvening, it's probably going to get a little frothy there. And then my biggest question is that going to be yet another sell the news event?
Mm.
And that's
Well,
where
one
you
thing I
come in.
would add, yeah, well, I'll definitely have some views, but one thing I do want to remind people is just because we see a lot of positive volume and liquidity coming in, because of the ETFs, remember, people can sell them too. And, you could have people sell their holdings in the ETFs in a big quantity. So I want everybody to just remember it's not always up only because of the ETFs, and that there are times where maybe, the downward slide may be hastened by more selling in the ETFs. But so that's just something to think about. But
So
I'm really curious if we're going to push through to 55K in Bitcoin. That's kind of the next area that I'm looking at.
it's exciting times. I'm wondering, David, when you first joined FTI, we on this session talked a little bit about, what kinds of things you're doing and what FTI is all about in the crypto space, right?
Sure.
Casper, I'm wondering for you, for Technos, can you tell us a little bit about like what you do and what kinds of things you're working on? Obviously, nothing confidential that you
No,
don't want
no,
to
of course, no. I mean, we are a valuation advisory firm. We've been around for 15 years, and we started off in the digital asset space almost a decade ago. So since then, we've seen a lot of projects. We've done a little bit over 1,000 valuations in the space, and valuation comes into play in a lot of different things. Like think about token rewards for projects, for employees, founders, etc. Think about international tax structuring when you're offshoring your tokens or your IP to the classic Cayman slash BVI sub, entity structure. That's when we come in, and then there's some of the financial reporting for funds. Um, so there's a lot of different ways where valuation or some of the transfer pricing questions come up when you're licensing IP to or from international entities. So that's where we focus on a lot. And what we're seeing is there's some buzz back in the market. We're seeing projects that we talked to maybe a year ago, all of a sudden come back and say like, hey, we're ready. We're gonna launch soon. People that are raising money again. So we're seeing a lot of positive vibes in the industry, and I think that it's great timing with conference season coming up. So I'm excited for the next year and a half, 2 years or so. See where this is gonna go.
That's great. And I would just echo same thing. Like a lot of things had been shelved for a little while, have been popping back up and reopening in a meaningful way. Is that what you've been seeing too, David? Like what's been on your roadmap to the extent you can
Yeah.
share?
Well, I can tell you things are extremely busy. We're having lots of positive conversation with clients, through different verticals. We have an innovation vertical where we help companies, incorporate blockchain and NFTs and other things to go to market. So we're seeing some of that. We're seeing some on the litigation side, helping some clients, defend class actions and, come up with strategies for that. And then a lot of compliance and regulatory work. A lot of companies revisiting their AML policies, revisiting their compliance policies, preparing for audits from the regulators. So really, we're seeing a nice mix of broad-based work coming in the door, and even some, engagements regarding M&A advising and companies looking at other companies to potentially buy. So I think what we're seeing is sort of a bullish view on the ecosystem right now, and really all different facets of our practice, really keeping busy.
And interesting new subsectors within the industry. Think about a real world asset tokenization, think about gaming. Those have, gaming NFTs, they've done well a while ago, but they're sort of back with a vengeance. And, there's all these new ways of utilizing blockchain technology to improve current infrastructure, to bring new products to the market. So I think that, we're really going to see sort of the fruits of the efforts of the builders that kept building during that rough bear market, and see what they come up with. So it's exciting all around.
Yeah, and also AI and blockchain and how those two work. And there's some projects that are doing like decentralized knowledge graphs that look interesting to me, and really using AI to confirm the validity of information. That's sort of part of a blockchain, and I think is very interesting to me, and something I've been spending time investigating also. And I'm a big believer, Casper knows, I'm not personally a gamer, but I'm a big believer in gaming as a tremendous use case for crypto and blockchain, and still very,
Yeah.
very supportive of that.
Well, is there anything else you guys want to cover today that we haven't?
No, I think I'm okay.
I think, just keep looking, keep an eye on the market. I'm really looking at 52,000 and 55,000 for Bitcoin. And otherwise, I'm out here in Arizona, and I'm wishing everybody a great long weekend.
Well, wait, I need to ask you something, because you mentioned Arizona now 3 times. What are you doing out there? Is it just pleasure, or is there something else? Not
I
the
have
pleasure.
to tell you, I have to tell you that, after COVID, and, traveling overseas became, more challenging for a period of time. I rediscovered like how great Arizona is, and Scottsdale and Sedona, and the weather out here and the landscape. So I'm just really just happy to be out here, have some close family here, friends going to come and visit. So just really enjoying the, Southwest and some of the beauty of our country.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I hope to see everybody next week for the next crypto roundup.
Great.
All right.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for joining us, Casper. We appreciate it.
Very welcome. Always have a good time.